All right. Mm, I'm going to start this training out by just saying that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we are gradually getting into the season whereby students are preparing, if they've not even written, they have been preparing for exams, and many of them, or many of them, would definitely come across certain things that would require a very good or adequate amount of preparation beyond just teaching them, beyond just presenting concepts to them. It's important that they understand beyond telling them, if you don't understand the question, tick it and then later. But beyond all of that, there are other deeper things that need to be done to properly prepare any student for um, exam success, be it year five or year six. Many of them will be writing common entrance. Some of them have written already. Right, I know some schools that have done theirs. I know some schools that will do theirs soon, especially in Lagos. And so it's good that if you're taking students in any of these, either in and outside Lagos, that you understand how to properly, or one of the best ways to get them prepared for such um, for such milestone in their life. And like we always say, this point, if for any reason they are not able to perform properly, uh, then it's going to take a toll on the parent financially, on the child mentally, and on academics outwardly, if I should use it that way. So that's why it's important that we also understand that it's important to ensure that we move from just teaching content to actually build what we call exam rigor. And so I would like to start off with asking, and I hope we are in a good position to actually answer verbally. Why do we think, or why we think students fail exam, despite consistent contact times, you're having them, if you're supposed to have them 16 times in a month, you're having them 16 or even 17 times in a month. If you're supposed to have them for an hour, 30 minutes, you're even extending it to an hour, 45 minutes. Why do they still fail even when you have these consistent contact times? When you are working with them, when you work with them using a complete syllabus, or you complete the syllabus with them, you use good teaching materials, and you even see that the students are working hard. They're working hard to ensure they ace that exam. But why do we still see that students still fail exam, or they do not get to the required cutoff or pass mark for them to achieve? Does anyone have an idea or would like to share? Right? Does anyone want to share why we think students still fail despite these reasons? What do you think is the missing factor or the missing link to students acing examinations? Hmm? Anyone? 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 Should I call names? Should I reach out to um somebody left when I said I'll reach out to hey. Okay, I'll just go ahead. All right, so there are so many factors that actually lead to students failing exam or not acing an exam as much as they would have wanted it to, aside these problems. And one thing we need to know is that uh, a student's performance in the exam goes beyond just working hard, you completing the syllabus, and maybe having contact with them as often as possible. Their performance also depends on their knowledge of the subject matter. It also depends on how they're able to process questions, the speed at which they're able to process questions, and also their decisiveness. They make at least 100 decisions when answering or when taking the exam, at least 100 decisions, because if they have math 20 something, when you combine all the questions, the moment they decide to take an option, they've made a decision. And that decision, though a single one, though is a single decision, cumulatively forms their mark at the end of the exam, right? And that is even more, I won't say danger, but that's even more, what's the word I'm looking for? That is even more scary when those choices are based on guesses. Because there's something we call in, I've forgotten, as long as I learned this thing, what we call negative marking in education, whereby if you fail a question, you are not penalized for failing it, you're penalized for guessing the answer, right? And so what happens is that we want to be sure that you really understand it. So we don't just penalize you for failing it, we also penalize you based on the fact that it's likely that other answers you got were, what's the word? Other answers you got were actually a guesswork. So that's the whole idea behind what's the word now? Negative marking in a topic in measurement and evaluation. It's a course, it's a whole course that you do in education. Please give me a minute, let me switch background so I can share my screen, my turn on my camera. All right. Okay. So I'm good. All right. So what was I saying? Yeah. So decisiveness under pressure, not just their ability to make decisions, but ability to make those decisions when they are put under pressure. It's one of the skills that they have to build when they're preparing for any exam, right? Then what are the metrics exams have? What do they actually measure? When students write exam, what are the metrics? So they test more on just their ability to understand concepts or their ability to their ability to solve questions stepwisely. It also tests their ability to recall information. It's not just about knowing what it is, but the ability to recall information. Is it a formula that you need to recall? Is it definition? All of those things are tested. And when you talk about recall, we have what we call, there are two types of recall. In modern education terminology, we have what we call the active recall and the prompted recall. In an exam, students are only able to make active recalls. And active recalls are recalls that we call it the ability of the student to yank out information from their memory or to pull out information, right? So the only reason why they'll be able to do this is if they've been able to go through, the teacher has been able to work through them on proper retention skills, like they've been able to build their retention on those concepts. There are many ways to ensure retention. You may, make it comparing it to real life scenarios, repeating it over time, constant practice, self practice, so many strategies to ensure retention is guaranteed, to ensure retention rather. But when it comes to prompted recall, which does not happen in an exam, except maybe you are working with special children, is when you have to tell them something that will make them remember something. So one of the ways you can do that is either when you one of the ways you can do that is to what's the word is to um, twist the question in a way that it makes them understand what you're trying to ask. So, for example, if it's a critical thinking question, you bring it down and then do it in a way that they would easily get it. But like I said, uh, that is not um, that is not possible for a normal exam it happens except it happens in except it happens in for special children or for special kids, right? So it also requires them to understand and interpret questions. Some students do not have that interpretation skills. What I mean is that when they see a question, they don't know if to do this or to do that. If they're not able to interpret the questions properly, then they will likely not be able to solve. They won't interpret properly. If they don't understand it, they won't interpret it properly. If they don't interpret it properly, they won't solve it properly, and then they eventually get the wrong answer. Another thing is work speed. Work speed is how much how much time are they required to answer a question. And that's why sometimes some questions are so tricky that it doesn't require you so much time to do it. For example, there's a topic we call decimal manipulatives. Decimal manipulative is a question that just requires you to know the decimal point to get your answer. And if you've come across this question in SAT, and if a student comes across this question in SAT and they are not familiar with how to manipulate decimals, they would end up solving it. Imagine I gave it to a child once, and the question says if 26 times 15 equals to, let's say if 26 times 10 equals to 260, what is 2.6 times 0.1? So the student was just didn't need to solve 2.6 times 0.1. You just needed to use the information given, which is always more complex than I just gave. You just need to use the information given, move the decimal points the right way, and then get the answer. And so that would take him likely 2 to 3 minutes compared to someone that knows what to do and does it under 30 seconds or less, or 1 minute or less, right? And so that's one good thing. Then they may not be able to avoid tricks or traps. I worked with a child this morning, and the question gave so many information that the learner did not need. A lot of information, a lot of values that the learner did not need, right? And I was just looking, will this child be able to do this? Hope the child knows it does not need this value, because they are tempted to think that they need to use all the values in a math question, or they're tempted to use all the information given to them, right? Sometimes when it comes to things like inferences, they're always tempted to, you know, to just, a lot of things happen. And so if they don't understand these trick and traps, what is more painful is when whatever they do, they find the answer in the options. Because that's one thing about national examination, not NECO, this common entrance. One thing about it is that whatever you solve, whatever the child solves, whatever operation the child uses, they'll see the answer in those 5 questions. So they do it in a way that they trick and trap the learner in a way that makes them think that this answer is going to be there. And when they solve it, if they divide, they'll see the answer. If they subtract, they're going to see the answer there. If they, what else? If they do anything, find square roots, they'll see the answer there. And those are tricks and traps. And if the child is not able to avoid it, then it would affect the score at the end. And then we have what we call anxiety. Are they able to manage the anxiety or their stress, especially as they approach the exam or even during the exam itself? How are they able to manage stress? How are they able to manage the anxiety? How are they able to, you know, how are you able to guide them through some anxiety management tips or strategies during or before the exam, right? Because funny enough, you'd hear that people, I've not heard of it with, kids in up in this level of classes, but you hear that people slump in exams, or people have this they just black out or anything. They just something just happens and they cannot remember anything. All of those things are stem from anxiety and or the inability to manage their stress, right? So one very important thing is to always help them is the important is to teach exam rigor, how to work with them, how to build exam rigor with the students. And when we say exam rigor, we're not trying to we're not trying to give it a similitude to exam vigor. Vigor means, or when we say rigor, we're not saying um, strenuous or very, very tasking and demanding set of questions, or giving them questions back to back in a very, very tasking way. That's not what we're talking about. We are talking about exposing them to exam style questions. When you're teaching a topic, are you including exam style questions in the exercises? In as much as you want to give them A, B, C, you can also bring it out. If you're familiar with new general mathematics, especially for GS3 and SS3, you see that they always bring in some questions for maybe SSC 1992, GC something, JAMB or Becker, something like that, BEC. They always bring out questions that are similar to what has been taught, or similar to what has been taught, for them to flow with it. So exam style questions are really important. How does this exam board, you know, ask questions? with regards to this topic, right? And it varies for different type of exams, right? Sometimes they want to know how well the child is able to reason or think critically. Sometimes they're trying to know how fast the child is able to process the question. Sometimes you just want to know whether the child even knows a lot of things those exam boards wants to measure rather. And then are you able to, during the process of preparing the students, are you able to match the content of the exam, content of the classwork, content of the exercise you are giving them to the exam difficulty? If the exam is going to ask them very, very thick questions, why are you asking them? If the exam is going to ask them hot questions, why are you asking them lots questions? Right? We have what we call hot questions and lots questions. Lots questions are what we call low order thinking questions. Like they don't require the child to think so much. Then we have what we call high order thinking questions or critical questions. Those ones that require a high level of reasoning, right? Uh, those questions require them to think either in a stepwise way or to just go outside of the box, right? And that's what separates them from the best, separates the best from the very best from the best, right? So are we able to match wording style? If you're not just in English, but even in mathematics, are we able to match the wording style? Are we able to ask are they able to even understand what the wording style is when they ask them to examine, when they ask them to differentiate, when they ask them to list, when they ask them to state, when they ask them to distinguish, what are they supposed to do? Are they able to understand? When they say simplify, do you know what it means to simplify? When they say express, estimate to the nearest, are they able to understand it? Are they able to work with it? Are they able to recognize it and apply such wording style? Are you including tricky questions or tricky phrasing or query, right? So that once they see it in the real situation, they are not, deceived by it. Then in questions, in especially for our maths, right? Are we including multi-step questions? Are we including English? Hope you know that you can also include multi-step questions in English, where you say from question one above or from question this above, why do you think stuff? So multi-step questions are not just in mathematics, but in mathematics it's different because in multi-step questions you're having the child carry out different operations within a particular question, something like board mass or what you can also call paired mass or bid mass. So they are carrying out different operations, right, in that same question because of what the question requires them to do. And so it can be two-step, it could be three-step, it could be four-step, depending on the topic or whatever it is they're required to do. So are we also involving them in involving the similar exam timing? When they practice the exam questions, the exam practice, do we just leave them to do what they want and then we can do that anything flies? No, that doesn't stay, that doesn't work. If the question says 45 minutes, time them on 45 minutes or even less, maybe like 40 minutes. So they're not resting on their oars and depending on the fact that I'll soon be done or my teacher will allow me to use 1 hour. Once you allow them and once you enforce it, they get used to it. For all of the time you work with them and practice questions, they get used to it. So include similar exam timing, if not even less. Then I've said include hot questions, which are high order thinking questions. Moving on. So how the another thing we need to also consider is to analyze error. We should go beyond just marking, and feeling to actually understand why students actually understand and help the students understand why they failed or what the mistake they made in that particular question. Why did they fail it? How can we help them not to fail this again, especially if it has become repetitive, right? So you have to analyze errors with them. You don't just simply mark and move on. You have to actually access and identify concept errors. Why what did the child, and that's why sometimes it's good, very good to actually work with these game assessment platforms, Quizlets, Kahoots. They'll give you a breakdown of how the students performed, what topic or what question number they all failed or most of them failed, so that it helps you to go back to the drawing board, literally go back to the board and then work through that concept again with the students, right? So concept error, what do they not understand about the concept? Is it that they're supposed to do division, especially when it comes to things like long division? What did they understand about it? What did they not get? Did they divide? Did they put the figures in the wrong place? Then is it a careless error? Is it an error due to carelessness? They're supposed to do 5 times 7, they are doing 6 times 7, maybe because of their handwriting, something like that. So there are so many reasons for careless error. They are thinking 7 times 2 is 21 instead of 14, right? Then is it a misreading or misinterpretation? When they read the question and they told you that this is what they thought the question was saying, how are you able to step in to say this is not what it is? When you see something like this is what it's actually saying, right? Not this. And so if you do all of this, if you do this in the classroom, in the normal teaching process, they would less likely do that. If you expose them to commonly or what we call frequently misinterpreted questions, FMQs, you will get to see that the what's the word? If you expose them to frequently misinterpreted questions, they would get to balance out, they'll get to adjust and most likely avoid it, especially for SATs where most of the questions are always repeated. Then time pressure. Are these errors due to time pressure? Where did they skip a line of solution because of time? Or was it a method confusion? Were they supposed to use elimination method rather than substitution method in what's the word now? In simultaneous equation? All of these things are what need to be analyzed and identified. When you assess it and identify it, you address it with the child. It's what we call feedback, giving them feedback, not just that you got 30 over 75. No. Tell them why they failed an answer and how they can properly avoid that error in the future. And then there's there's what what we call interleaving practice as against block practice. In when you set out exams, although most times in Nigeria we use the interleaving practice, which is a very good one. But I'm talking about what happens in the classroom, what happens in your daily interaction with the child as you're preparing them for that particular exam. Do you use when you set the assessment, maybe on their OneNote or on the do you do it in a block do you use a block method or the block practice method or the interleaving method? The block practice method is where you get to stack the same type of questions along consecutive question numbers. Question one, ratio. Question two, ratio. Question three, ratio. Question four, ratio. Maybe question five, proportion, which is similar to ratio. Question six, you now enter addition or subtraction of decimal. Addition or question six, additional. Question seven, same thing. Question eight, same thing. Question nine, same thing. So they are thinking in a straight on a straight line. They are not divergent in their thinking. But if you say question one, ratio. Question two, statistics. Question three, decimals. Question four, geometry or area, perimeter. Question five, number sense, number enumeration. They are more flexible in their thinking, right? Right? Instead of just assessing them on the same topic in the long block, right? So what we do is that we mix topics and the question types in the same session. So instead of setting 20 percentage questions, you mix percentage ratio, algebra, word problems, reasoning, all of those things, you mix them together. And what it actually does is that it helps it helps them to recognize methods. It helps them to switch very efficiently between one method or the other. Then it reinforces the skills. I tell teachers that skills are built through strategies. Students, a skill that a child needs. If you have used IXL before, you see that IXL shows you all the skills the child needs to learn within a particular class, right? And the thing about skill is that skills are built with strategy. How do you know how to solve what's the word now? How does your child know how to solve long division questions? Is because you taught them a particular strategy that will walk them through it. You show them a particular strategy. For example, I use BDMS, B, DB, divide, DMSR, sorry, DMSR, I use DMSR. So any child I've taught long division knows DMSR. and that's divide, subtract, multiply, repeat, divide, subtract, multiply, repeat. And we also use the structure of the house, so they know that the divisor is outside, the dividend is inside, the quotient is always taken on top. So they know how to move through that. Then once you're able to do that, once you're able to reinforce that skill, they are able to recall and present it to you. Then it helps with flexible thinking. Like I said, against straight line thinking, they're able to think flexibly and they're able to make faster decisions under time pressure. So the way the exam is not the way the exam is. If the way the exam is structured, not the same way your questions are structured, then that means they'll just keep attempting. And that's not the reality. The reality is that our exams are set on using interleaving method, which makes it easy for them which makes it required for them to be more um, decisive at a very, very fast pace, right? It also helps with better retention and then familiarity with the exam styled questions. So it's not just about, and that's one thing, we think that they're very good. When we give them the same question, we think they're very good with with um with the question. They're getting 8 over 8, 10 over 10 in the same. We call them same level questions. When they're on the same level means you're just asking questions that are requiring the children to remember. You're not asking questions that are asking them to understand or to apply or to synthesize. If you're familiar with what we call the Bloom taxonomy a is is a concept that helps us to properly assess or evaluate students on knowledge using the is it seven the seven except for the cognitive. We have the three levels in the we have the uh I always forget how to say it. We have the seven levels in the cognitive domain. So they are supposed to is under knowledge, understanding, application, synthesis, coerce, synthesis, evaluation, and some other things. There are like seven of them. So when you're evaluating them on just knowledge, what is solved, define, then they won't be able to, they will not be flexible, right? In their thinking. And how can we even include these interleaving practices in our classes? Like when you are teaching them a concept. A very good thing is that when you teach them a concept in week one, when you move to week two, include questions in week one with week two, which helps them to recall. So you're not just trying to have them remember, you're also trying to know if they really, really remember so that you know if you are going back to that concept or not. So when you start with week one and you start, let's say, ratio in week one and percentage week two, bring ratio question in week two so they're not surprised. They say we're not doing, but I've taught you. Then in week three, bring in few questions from week one and week two in week three, right? And it does not have to be a lot. You can ask 5 questions. Put 2 questions from week one when you enter week two. Then when you enter week three, 1 question for week one, 1 question for week two, 3 questions for week three, and that's how you're able to build their retention, right? And then when you enter week four, you can decide to now leave week one alone, only ask on week two and week three, and then week four. When you enter week five, you can leave week two alone and week one, then three, four, because you've used 2 weeks, 3 weeks to almost ask questions on week one already, right? So how do we apply that? I was already ahead of myself by talking about how to apply that. So well, aside from teaching the concept clearly, give short focused practice questions. Then switch to the mixed exam style. That's what I mean. When you do that in the first week, in the second week, switch to mixing the questions. Let it be different. Let us have a chunk of week one and a chunk of week two. It does not have to be equal. Though. The quantity for that new week precedes the quantity for the other weeks, right? Because you're not just trying to have them recall, you're trying to also be sure, you're trying to also ensure that they understand what has been treated in the first, in the one that you just currently worked with them. So this is what we are talking about when we talk about block practice. When you're asking the same type of question in a consistent, in in what am I saying? The same type of question um consecutively. When you space it out in a different way, square, circle, triangle, all of those things. It's in the short term now. I will not. It's you don't be. I'm going to also mention that I'm going to mention that in the short term, it might be really stressful working with the living practice questions, but you will see the results in the long term, and it's the long term that matters the most, right? If at the end, the long term is where the exam is, the long term is where the assessment is. If at the end they're not able to, deliver in the exam hall or in the exam, then it means that the strategy used um, is not what I say, is not is not effective. However, for the block practice in the short term is very good. That's why you see your children getting 10 over 10, 8 over 8, 9 over 9, all of those things. But in the long term, they will not be able to, it won't be sustainable. The ability to show that consistent skill, that retention skill will not be sustainable, sorry, in the long term, in the long run, right? Good. Okay. Let's move on. I think this is the last slide. Yeah, so that's just it. Another thing, one other strategy I have found to be very, very useful when preparing students for exam is that when you get to a particular point, I didn't put it down here. When you have uh, the word is when you have worked with them on a particular for a particular period of time. Uh, okay, let me put it this way. This is for when it comes to emergencies. I've seen people which are say, I have to prepare this child for this. I've seen it not even twice, not three times. I have to prepare this child for this exam. Is it 2 weeks, 1 month, 1 week? Sorry, 1 week, not possible. Sorry, 1 month, few weeks, from few weeks to 1 month, and you can't start teaching. So what one thing that has really worked is to have them work with them on the exam practice. Like I mean the practice questions for the exam, if you have it, walk them through, bombard them with it. And as you are working with them, let them observe their thinking pattern and their thought line. And when you see that, this child has a gap in this particular topic, not in that question. I mean, this is what I mean. If for example, they say a ratio question and they feel it, don't assume that the child does not. I'm not saying start. What I'm going to say is that if you feel there's a gap, teach the topic. But it's not because the child expresses a gap in the first question that you now assume that the child does not know ratio at all. No. If the child has an issue in ratio for that question, let the child attempt other questions before you can now think of now presenting the concept to the child. Because that way you are saving your time and you're actually being sure that the child doesn't really, really, really get that concept. So if the child doesn't get the concept, what you do is that you can now focus on that topic, and that focus cannot be a very long focus. It has to be very, very short and strategic, especially in exams where they need, and when you're preparing students for exam, you are not teach child not going to teach them the fastest method to arrive at the answer. Except these are exams where they have to show their workings, which is highly unlikely. All exams are usually MCQs, right? Because of easy marking and all of those things. But we want them to be able to use their mental math skills to work answers very fast and to get the answers as soon as possible. It's not about bringing up paper like a very studious student and trying to work the solution detailed, prudently. No, that is a skill that they don't need in an exam. What they need in an exam is to be able to solve those questions at the shortest possible time. So you're not just working on them achieving 45 minutes. You're working with them utilizing methods that can help them achieve 45 minutes or less. You understand? So that's the end of this. I had to make it very brief, uh, but not too brief. So I don't know if you have any questions that I can take before we round off. Do we have any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Okay, yes, Mr. Michael.
Okay, the question I have is based on what you're saying about preparation of exams. Are there difference between SAT 11 plus SAT 4? Are they all the same or are there differences?
No, they are different. They are quite different. For SAT is not everyone, although some, that's for the UK students. Oh. So not all of them take SATs, but they all take 11 plus. SAT is more of like how will I put it now? Is like it's like just a standard assessment. It's just like everyone has to take this exam to be sure that you really left. But UK plus 11 plus is more of targeted towards certain schools, right? So if you are going for this particular school, if you are going to this particular school, you should take the 11 plus exam. So we have it in the for GL grammar school, uh Abbey Rose. You have exams for that. For SAT is like everybody taking SSC, for example. So the questions are not the same in UK 11 plus. They are not required to show their workings, but in SAT, for arithmetic and reasoning, they are required to show their workings, and in fact their mark is dependent on the workings they show. Do you understand? So, and for SATs, they're taking three papers. They're taking they're taking three subjects: math, science, and English. But in 11 plus, they're taking maths, English, verbal reasoning, and non-verbal reasoning. So they're taking quite different exams. But for 11 plus, you have to really specific on what exam you're going to be taking with the child. Any other question? Oh, was I clear? Was I clear on that? Yes.
Yes, yes.
And so what I've found is that most of the times these past questions or these past questions are seen, they're always online. It's just maybe most of Nigerian, but all of these, SATs, UK 11 plus, you can find their past questions online. When you just type UK 11 plus practice questions, free PDF, you see many options that can take you there. All right. So do you have any other question? Any other question, please? All right. In the absence of any question, I would like to say, okay, so please, it's not just for us to do this training, it's also for us to actually apply it, right? And it's very simple to apply, especially when you are sure you're really sure you want to get the results of a child passing an exam, like you're really definite about the results. So it's about being diligent enough to ensure that you plan your resources enough to incorporate all these things. So sometimes, like I know, sometimes we work with worksheets, and worksheets are done in using blocked practice, right? However, it depends. I don't know how many of us do our assessments, how we assess, like we do our formative assessments in class. Going into the topic, how do you assess? Some of you might use worksheets, some of you might use some of us might use what's the word now? Uh, Google Forms, all of those things, or online quizzes. But whatever, if you are using worksheet, please try to limit the amount of work. Now, even if you download the worksheet, it doesn't mean that the child has to do the entire thing. You can download the worksheet that addresses the previous week, download the worksheet that addresses this week. Let the child do the first five questions in this week's worksheet and just attempt two in the former one. And then you can leave the rest for the child to do as homework or as self practice, right? Because you downloaded the entire worksheet and the entire worksheet has 20 questions, doesn't mean that the child has to do the entire 20 questions. Do you understand? And sometimes we need to be very, very, because it's what we call consistent practice. But consistent practice don't mean that you come to the class and the whole 1 hour, 30 minutes is used to do worksheets on the same interleaving block practice. No, that is not consistent practice. Consistent practice means you're exposing the child to as many things that would make for the child to retain. So what you do when you expose the child to a block practice like 10 questions, 20 questions at once, you are retaining that idea or that concept for the short run, but in the long run, you're going to have trouble. You might have trouble. Likely going to have trouble with that. So when you come in, do not do it's one of those strategies as is I won't I don't want to go more than what I want to say. But then you want to be sure that you are not just giving the child back-to-back question, but the child is also, timed. One, the child is also engaging with a cross level questions, not just straightforward question. What is 10 times 5? What is this times? No, put it in a word problem. Put it in use image. Use you can diversify. There are different ways to diversify it. All right, so thank you so much for joining. I don't know if we're gonna have another training next time, but would would see if there's any need for anything. All right, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Uh, um, and have a wonderful week ahead as well.
Very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you so
Thank you very
much.
much.
Thank you.
I was hearing two voices.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much. Thank God. I can't end the meeting for everybody, so I have to leave.